Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get started. Tonight, we're going to be talking about fertilizer management. Fertilizer management is one of the main things that we want to focus on in any kind of a regenerative agriculture system or a soil health system or just growing food. The idea of fertilizer basically means, like the definition means, a man-made plant nutrient, but that is not what we are. That's not what I'm talking about when I talk about fertilizer management. I call it fertilizer management because we need to focus on plant food, but the way that the plants get food is very different. So we're not going to be buying fertilizer. We're not going to be managing fertilizers. All we need to do is get our mineral cycle going, get our water cycle going, understand what ecological succession our plants will grow in, meaning the species of plant we choose to grow. We create those environments in our growing space, whether it's a backyard or whether you're a small farm or if you're a big farm. It doesn't matter. Those principles are the same. So when we're thinking about managing fertilizer, we need to think in terms of feeding the microbes that are in the soil. And mostly there's two groups that we want to feed. There's the fungus group and the bacteria group. We don't have to worry about feeding nematodes or microarthropods or any of the other functional groups of animals in the, or should I say organisms that are in the soil. We don't have to worry about that, because if we feed, if we feed the bacteria and the fungus, then all of those other ones show up, because the other ones are higher predators in the food chain or the food web. So when we are preparing our soils, or if we need to fertilize because the plants are not growing well, then think about what you are feeding bacteria and what you're feeding fungus. In quite a few of the other classes I've already done, I've already told you, but I'm going to explain it again tonight because this is what it's all about. Okay, but I say this probably in every class I do. The fungus eats woody things, so we need to have wood chip type things on the soil surface, just like in a forest. The leaves dry up at the end of the year in a deciduous forest. They fall off. That's why we call it fall. And they fall to the ground and we leave them there. That's why we call them leaves. Most people, if you have a cute little yard, you're out there raking up your leaves. You're not supposed to do that. You're supposed to leave them there because it feeds the fungus. That is the fungal food, or the dead, mature plant material that dry up and die. So that's the fungus food. So what is bacteria food? Bacteria food are the green living plants that are that somehow die, but their life was short. So they were young when they died. So when you mow the lawn and those lawn clippings go back into the soil, that's feeding bacteria. That's bacteria food, because the ratios of carbon to nitrogen are different for woody things compared to the green living things. And so if you have a lot of carbon and not very much protein, then you will be feeding fungus. If you have lots and lots of protein, meaning so protein, that would be like alfalfa. We think of feeding livestock alfalfa because it's high in protein, but we don't cut alfalfa when it's old and stemmy and woody, because by then there's not as much protein in it. So we talk about carbon to nitrogen ratios. So when I say nitrogen and protein, in this sense of talking about fertilizer, they're the same thing. They're both bacterial food. Okay. So that's an important thing to think about. We've got to think in terms of feeding fungus and bacteria when we are feeding our soils, feeding our plants, and when we are managing plant food, which we commonly think of as fertilizer. So that's why I call this fertilizer management. So when we go to the store and you look at a bag of man-made fertilizer, it will have 3 numbers on it, which represent NPK, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. So we don't need to worry too much about nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. Once we get our mineral cycle working, our water cycle working, and we are collecting lots of solar energy from the sun in the form of chlorophyll. So the sun is beating down, it's hitting the trees and the grass and the roots and all the plants, and the exudates, the sugars that are made, are going into the soil. That's going to make us a fertile land. So we don't need to think about the NPK. We don't need to worry about that too much. In recent years, meaning the last 80 years, last 100 years, since World War II, we've learned a lot about NPK and how we can make bombs out of NPK, how we can make plant food out of NPK. And so it became a thing in widespread agriculture to use the NPK as a plant food. But that has caused problems with our soils nowadays, and we don't have as nutritious food as we have had. So what do we use if we're not going to use a man-made fertilizer? And that's where compost comes in. We need to be making compost. And so compost can be a very good fertilizer for plants, but we don't need to worry about fertilizer. Once we get the soil working, and that includes compost. We don't need to make compost and add compost every single year. Now, I normally do that because compost is a good source of food for the fungus and bacteria to keep them going. But if you had enough plant material growing in your own yard, you wouldn't have to make a specific compost pile. You could just take that detritus of wood and grass clippings and garden waste and leaves that fall off your trees. You put that on your garden every year, and that continues to feed the fungus and bacteria so that your soil continues to function. So if you just have a normal garden and you've been gardening the way that the master gardening classes have been teaching for 20 years, and you've been using man-made fertilizers, you've been tilling, you've been just using normal gardening methods, and you're wanting to convert to this type of a system that I've been talking about, which would be a regenerative system. This is more along the organic, the old organic way of doing things, meaning the 1960s and 70s. If you read those old organic gardening books, that's what I mean by old organic gardening. If you're gardening along those lines and trying to follow these types of methods, and you want to, so you've been gardening the old way, you want to start this new regenerative way. The first 1 to 5 years, I know on the slide here it says 1 to 3, but it could take a little bit longer for some people. Usually it takes 2 years if you're really dedicated. But for the first 1 to 5 years, you need to probably continue to add a little bit of man-made fertilizer just so that your plants keep growing good. Because if you have a garden that's been tilled extensively for the last 30 years, your soil is dead. That's just what happens with a tillage system. Over and over and over, your soils are dead. And so for the first 1 to 3 years of conversion over into this new regenerative system, you're going to need to continue to add the fertilizer. And I don't know how to stress that enough. I've known a lot of people who've tried to transition. They hear all the benefits of regenerative agriculture and they think, well, why haven't we done that all along? And they go cold turkey and they just stop all of their old methods and they start the new methods. The fact is, your plants are not going to be able to grow very good during the transition because they don't have the microbe food web in place to do the mineralizing, to do the decomposition of the detritosphere, to do all of the things to create the mineral cycle, to make that mineral cycle work. It can take time. I've known some people who have done it in 1 year. I've done it in 1 year on some spots, But usually, if you're dealing, especially if you're dealing with a larger acreage, like something over 20 acres, 100 acres, plan on a 3-4 year transition. So you would stop tilling, you would start adding in fish hydrolysates. You would add in compost. You would start growing cover crops. When you are not growing a cash crop, have another crop growing there in the off time when your cash crop's not growing. So always have that living root in the soil. So you start in all the with all these principles. So you're doing everything the right way, but you would still add in some man-made commercial fertilizer until you get that soil to where it needs to be. And some people say, but you've been saying that these commercial fertilizers are killing all that stuff. And I probably have said that. And there are other people in this soil health movement who have probably said that. But really what we're dealing with is it's a combination of all the things we're doing. The biggest problem would be some of the really harsh chemicals that we spray on the ground. And that kills microbes like nobody's business. The second biggest problem would be tilling the soil. And then the third biggest problem are the more normal chemicals that we put on the ground. Because chemicals come in different levels of toxicities for these microbes. And then the fourth big problem would be monocropping and not having a living root in the soil. You know, and the list would go on, you know, but those are the four big ones of what is really killing the soil. Fertilizer is not, it would be way down the list. It would be like maybe number 10. It doesn't really kill the microbes. It's just that your beneficial microbes don't need to grow if you're putting a lot of nitrogen in that soil, because the plants just are using up that nitrogen. So they're not feeding the microbes that make the nitrogen. The plants won't feed the microbes that make the nitrogen because they don't need to feed them. And so that's the relationship that we need to build in this 1 to 3 year or 1 to 5 year period of time, is a relationship between the root exudates feeding those microbe colonies that are going to be making the nitrogen, the different forms of nitrogen. So there would be nitrate, there's nitrite, there is ammonium, there's all these different forms of nitrogen that can be used by plants. And there's different mineralizers in the soil, meaning fungus and bacteria, that would produce different types of nitrogen in the soil. Now, a lot of times people think, well, if you're growing the plants, the nitrogen fixers, which is, we call those legumes, legumes or legumes, it's a different pronunciation, the same thing. But the legumes, they are producing, with symbiosis, they produce nitrogen in their roots with, what is it? I think it's Azobacter, is that right? And there, I think that's the name of the organism. But there are other free living organisms in the soil that don't need a plant to make nitrogen. One of those is called Azospirillum. Another one is called Rhizobium. There's probably others. I'm not super well versed in all those critters in the soil, but there's a name of a few of those that actually get nitrogen from the atmosphere, because the nitrogen is in the air, and as the air is in the soil, then as it cycles through the soil, through earthworm holes, through the porosphere, when you have a rainstorm or an irrigation event, the water goes down through, it pulls air down through, nitrogen comes down in, but as air, it's not usable to plants. But these microbes that I've mentioned, they will take that nitrogen and they will do what they do, and they make that nitrogen available to the plants. So that's pretty awesome. And we can manage that as people, we can manage it. And how do we manage it? By having a living root in the soil all year, by not tilling, by feeding the microbes. So we need to have woody things on the surface of the soil. We need to have green living plants on the surface of the soil. like dead ones that are dying, you know. So when you're trimming leaves that are alive, whether it's your lawn or if it's weeds, all that stuff, it can go in onto that soil surface. As it begins to decompose, it's feeding bacteria. Okay. Alfalfa is a very, very excellent plant to grow. It's a beautiful plant. It grows back quickly. Everybody could be growing that as part of their herbaceous layer. You know, there's a bunch of layers in the, you know, you got your ground coverage, you have roots, you have herbaceous layer, which are bigger plants. You have your shrubs, which are maybe 6 feet tall. You have your short trees, like fruit trees that maybe get 12, 15 feet high. And that would be your understory. And then your upper story would be your, or overstory, same thing. That would be like your great big trees, your big shade trees. And so those are the different stories of things that grow. And then there's a vine layer that would grow up the trees. So things like grapevines. So if the more of those layers we have in our system growing, then the more trimming we can do, which creates more fertilizer in the long run for our plants. But it's not fertilizer until we feed the microbes. So when we're thinking of fertilizer management, we got to think about in terms of feeding the microbes. All right. If we had a herd of cattle or a herd of sheep, we would go out there and would take care of them every day. We would do our chores. We would feed them. Ranchers, farmers do that all the time. It's a normal thing to do. So as gardeners and as food producers, we need to be remembering that our very small livestock they are our most important ones. We need to be doing our chores daily to make sure they have food and water. So how do we feed a microbe? Well, you have that detritus layer. So this is a review. We have the detritus layer of bacteria food, which is green living things that are dying, like the green plants we trim, like a lawn we mow. And then there's the woody things. So that's an old plant that it grew, it died, but it's standing there. You cut that down, put it on the soil surface. That's fungus food. Okay, lots of carbon in that one, lots of nitrogen or protein in the green living plant, in the bacteria food, lots of carbon in the fungus food. And there's one more food source for both of these, and that is the exudates that come out of the plant's roots. And fungus and bacteria both eat the exudates. So those are the food sources for the microbes. And so that's how we manage our fertilizer. Okay. Grow alfalfa because it grows so fast that we can always have bacterial food to be going on the surface of our gardens. So we would cut it down, mulch around your plants. In a month, it's ready to cut again and mulch around your plants again. In times of hunger and famine, alfalfa has every vitamin known to man. It's good to eat. I don't know how palatable it is. I don't know if people like it as far as good, but it's very nutritious. If you have livestock, you can feed them. If you have laying hens, feed them alfalfa. They will make eggs on alfalfa. They need other things too, but I find a lot of times, it's sad to see, but a lot of times people have chickens and all they feed them is the food that comes out of the chicken food bag. And they're walking around in a chicken coop and they don't have green feed. They need green feed. If you let a chicken out and watch it for a day in its natural habitat, it will eat things that are above its head, leaves up here. It will eat leaves at its eye level, plants there. It will eat the plants on the ground. It will scratch, it will dig underground, and it will eat bugs that are underground. And so it eats from its entire horizon, wherever it can find food. So that's what we need to be mimicking if we want the healthiest chickens, which produce the healthiest eggs, which make the healthiest people. Alfalfa can make an excellent extract. So we can make, we could put alfalfa into a blender. So just pick some alfalfa, throw it in the blender, fill your blender up with some water, you know, I don't know, 2 or 3 cups of water with a handful of alfalfa. Turn that on, and you need a powerful blender to do this. Like you'd need a Vitamix or something equivalent, a good high quality one. $30, $40 Vitamix from Walmart, it's not going to work. But you shatter those that alfalfa, all of those leaves. You churn them up, you shatter those up, and then you just pour them through a strainer, so you get all the pulp, and that pulp is part of your detritosphere. Just mulch your plants with it, or put it in your compost. You could even feed it to an animal. But all of the juice that's left over, you can apply that to your plants. Put that on your plants. It's a very good food for your plants. Alfalfa has a chemical in it called tricantanol. I don't even know if I'm pronouncing that right because I read. And so maybe there's a better pronunciation. Oh, that's funny. A better pronunciation. That was a blooper. I'll leave that one in here. Of tricantanol, but it's just naturally occurring. It's found in alfalfa. It's healthy. It's fine. It's good. It's just a chemical compound, but it's a growth stimulant, and it will stimulate the growth in the alfalfa as it's growing. That's probably why it grows so quick. But it will also help other plants to grow quickly as well. Now, there could be situations where you didn't want other plants to grow quickly. Well, if that's your case, then don't apply it. But if you do need other plants to grow quicker and be healthier, put it on there and they will grow and they will thrive. I've got one more slide here. And you can just take a screenshot of this or whatever. But this is a lot of what I was just talking about. So in review, let's just go through this. What do bacteria eat? They eat green living plants that are decomposing. Okay. What does fungi eat, or fungus? It eats old mature plants, woody, dead things. Okay. So what do bacteria do? They release minerals for plant food, meaning they make plant food. They make your fertilizer. And they will make nitrate. So it's a form of nitrogen called nitrate. That's what bacteria release. When bacteria die, they release nitrate. When bacteria get rid of waste, they release nitrate. When a higher predator, like a nematode or a protozoa, eat a bacteria, then when they give off waste, it releases nitrate. Okay. It also can begin to release some ammonium as those guys die, as you move up that food chain. So so we're getting the plant foods that our plants need. What does fungus do? It releases minerals for plant food, and they create ammonium. All right. How does it create ammonium? Well, microarthropods, there's a whole bunch of species, lots of species of microarthropods, probably thousands. They eat fungus, and when they eat the fungus, they release ammonium. So what plants need ammonium? Things like trees need ammonium. It's late succession plants need ammonium. What plants love nitrate? That would be early succession plants, lots of weeds, your early succession plants. So what if you want to grow most of our garden foods? A lot of our garden foods are, probably most of them are mid-succession, so we need a balance of nitrate and ammonium. There is a group of garden plants called the brassicas. That's the cabbage family. So let's name a few of those. Broccoli, cauliflower, kale, collards, and then we jump into the radishes, mustards, rutabagas, turnips, things like that. So those are all early succession plants. So they want more nitrate, less ammonium. But if you're growing a lot of other things, tomatoes, peppers, cucumbers, corn, there's just a lot of the foods that we eat that want more of a balance of nitrate to ammonium. The grains, wheat, oats, barley, they want more of a nitrate and ammonium balance. So what does that mean? That means we need to have a balance of bacteria and fungus. Well, how do you do that? You feed equal parts of woody things and new green leafy things. So if you actually did feed exactly equal parts, you would still be bacterial dominant, because the bacteria are growing so much, so you would need to actually want to feed more fungal food. So in a good compost that I make, I have 60% wood chips, and then the rest would be bacteria food in the form of green living plants and a little bit of high nitrogen stuff, which was bacteria food. So if you go 50-50, you'll usually still be bacterial dominant. So you need to go more like 60-40 so that you have more of that balance of fungus and nitrate. Now, I think, a lot of people, there's gardening gurus out there who are putting down a foot of wood chips and they're just gardening in that. They're not worried about feeding the bacteria, and it's working well for them. And that is because it's really easy to get the bacterial colonies growing. The bacterial colonies grow and thrive, and they do really well when they are, getting going. They just take off. It's hard to get rid of bacteria. It's easy to get the bacteria going. In fact, if you really want to get bacteria going, one of the fastest ways is to till your garden. You'll kill a lot of fungus and you'll get a lot of bacteria going, and they will produce a lot of nitrate. And when they do that, it will wake up a lot of weed seeds, and now you have a weed problem on your hands. Which is one reason I'm for not doing as much tilling. Do less tilling, get more wood chips out there, so you get your fungus growing more, because they're hard to establish. It's not hard to grow bacteria, so don't feed them as much. Feed more fungal foods. Okay, so that's let's see. Yeah, so that's my last slide. Compost management will be next week. So that is my last slide here. If we have any questions, go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question, or we can put it in the chat box. You can type in the chat box and I will answer any questions you have to help you have the best garden in the world.
Am I on unmuted?
Yes, I can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay, well, Melanie says she has a bunch and I have a bunch, and so.
Okay, let's hear them. Let's go through them.
Okay, how about corn cobs and corn? I'm too high. Corn cobs and.
Okay. So as far as bacterial food and fungal food,
yeah.
If you pick your corn when it is super green, then it's going to be it's starting to mature, but it's not completely mature yet. So if you are eating sweet corn at the kitchen table, you've boiled it, you've made a beautiful dinner, and you have sweet corn and you eat it and you have that leftover corn cob, it will have a lot more nitrogen in it, a lot more proteins than if you left it on the corn stalk, and the corn stalk aged and dried naturally, and it looks completely dead. And 2 months after the time when you would have picked it, you go out there and you pick it, and then it has dried corn on it, and you shell that corn off, and you use that dried corn to make cornmeal. Now you have two different products. One of them is going to be a lot of bacteria food, and that's the sweet corn that you ate at the kitchen table. The other one will have a lot of fungal food, a lot more fungal food, because the sugars have turned to more carbon. Your nitrogens have become less, your carbons have become more. So it's going to take the fungus to decompose it at this point, which makes a great fungal food. So that's
okay.
A good thing.
So I should be putting those things in the compost then.
You certainly should put all of that material in the compost. You just need to make sure that you're balancing so that you have about 60% of things that fungus is going to eat compared to your 40% of the things that bacteria is going to eat. So here's the simple way. So I just gave you the complicated answer. If it comes from your kitchen, it's bacterial food. It's a green component. So that's part of your 40% for bacterial food. Okay. I mean, very few people are making cornmeal. I just don't
Right.
know of hardly anybody who does that. John, Melanie,
Could
you guys-
be, but we usually buy the flour, yeah, okay.
yeah. And if you did want to grind your own cornmeal, you'd probably just buy some whole corn. You're probably not
Yeah.
raising a field of corn to let dry. So what you're gonna have is you guys are having sweet corn, corn on the cob,
Mhm.
and that's gonna be a green component, which means a bacterial food.
Okay. So
Okay, so we,
wait a minute. So even corn cobs are bacterial food.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
and they'll, how quickly did they compost? I don't know.
10 years.
They'll compost pretty quick once you get your compost going.
Okay,
And William, what were you saying about the cornmeal? Do you add that to your compost?
No, I was just talking about human food. See,
Okay.
if you grow corn in your garden and you let it dry, and so it's standing there until Thanksgiving and it's completely dead and there's a foot of snow out there, that's when you'll go out to harvest your dried corn, and you would make your cornmeal at that point. The leftovers would be a corn cob,
Right.
and that's going to be fungus food.
well, I've got wood chip mulch, but it's painted. I guess it's painted.
Well, it's
I don't know,
not,
it's
it's-
dark brown. is
They
what it is.
say it's, what do you think of it? I mean, that's what we were given when we,
Yeah. Yeah.
What do you think? Is that going to?
Yeah, I don't like painted wood chips. I don't like them. It's probably fine to use them.
Well,
If they're not,
Mm.
once the paint is dry, it's not toxic anymore. If it was, we'd all be dead because all our houses are painted.
Right.
Half of our furniture is painted. Once it dries, the toxicity is basically gone, but it's not necessarily going to be helping you. What's going to happen is you would need to, you would probably find that it's going to decompose over time in a garden setting, because there will be certain combinations of bacteria and fungus that will decompose those paints. So it's not a bad thing, I don't think.
So I'll go find raw wood chips then.
That's the best thing to do, yes.
Okay, and add that then to my compost.
Yeah.
yeah, okay, John wanted me
About
to ask about
60%.
sawdust.
Yeah,
Okay.
We are building the basement and we just had it framed and there was a lot of sawdust. And I said to our son-in-law who was doing it, I want all the sawdust. And he thought I was crazy. Well, we don't have everything that we should have had, but we do have some. And so,
Okay.
How about putting that in compost?
Okay,
Yeah.
so sawdust is very fine, and
Yeah.
it can stop the oxygen flow into a compost pile if there's too much. So
Okay.
if you were going to make a compost pile, I would only use about 10% of the total volume could be sawdust.
Uh-huh.
Because if you start getting 20, 30, 40%, you will
Yeah.
start cutting out oxygen flow through that compost pile. And then it would go anaerobic, and it's a bad thing. You want to keep that oxygen flow going through that. So it's fine to use that sawdust. You just don't want too much of it.
okay, we do have one of those tumblers. We bought it long ago.
Uh-huh.
And it is full of maybe a little bit of leaves, but a lot of garden scraps. And we've quit putting things in it, I think now, haven't we?
Mhm.
But I don't know if it's dead. I really think it needs some wood chips, leaves. I've asked John to be putting leaves in there, but we don't have trees yet, so we don't have leaves. Our
Yeah,
neighbors do,
yeah.
and we did get some from them in the fall. But I think it would this be a good thing to add then? Some of the sawdust and tumble it, and then maybe add some leaves and tumble it and just let it sit?
Yeah, you're going to want to be tumbling it almost every day so it doesn't go anaerobic.
Oh, we do, see?
Probably. Those tumblers are tricky. They're hard to handle. In fact, it's one of the hardest ways to make compost and get it right is with a tumbler. They're a great thing for a garden center to sell. They're popular. They look cute in your yard.
Yeah.
And I hate to be derogatory about that, but that is kind of the truth about the tumblers. You need to be turning them almost every day to
Yeah.
keep lots of oxygen in them.
Okay,
Okay, so, how do we know if what we already have is anaerobic or not?
Smell it.
Okay,
If it's stinky, it's anaerobic.
okay,
If your compost is stinky, if it has an offensive odor, then you wouldn't want it. If it has a pleasant, beautiful odor and you would put it in a flower pot and put it on your kitchen table, just
Okay.
by the smell, if you'd
Okay.
be willing to put it on your kitchen table while you're eating dinner, it's going to be aerobic.
okay.
so,
I mean, use the nose test. I hear you laughing, and it is kind of funny, but that is the best way. All of
Okay.
your good, beneficial organisms have a pleasant odor. All of your bad disease causers have a bad odor. And there's some of the decomposers that have a bad odor, and they're not disease causers. You're going to be just fine. And so it's hard to know whether they're a beneficial or bad, but they will all be anaerobic, and it's only the anaerobic ones that smell bad. So if you have something that smells good, then you can be positive that it's not a disease causer. So that can be a little bit confusing to some people. So I like to explain that.
I will. If it is anaerobic, what can we do to help it along now?
Okay, so if it does stink and it's anaerobic,
Yeah,
you need to add oxygen. So turn it a lot and
Okay.
add fibrous, big dead things like wood chips in there.
Okay. All right, so what we've done is we've taken cattle fence or a sheep fence or whatever it is, and made brought it together in a circle, and probably 6 feet in diameter, and we're using that now for compost.
Okay, yeah, that's good. That's kind of how I do it.
Okay.
Yeah.
And it doesn't, of course, it would be difficult to dig it out or turn it. You just because it's
Okay,
wide.
so I'll explain how I do it.
Okay,
I make that circle with that wire fence thing,
Yeah.
but on the end where it goes together, I just hook it with something very simple like a bungee cord or something.
okay,
And then you can undo it, and then it springs open. You take it off, you set it up next to your old pile, and then you turn your old pile into that one. And then it's pretty easy. I mean, it's work. You're going to burn some calories, but that's all good exercise.
okay. Yeah, I need to do that. But explain that again, so
so we
that
have two, there's actually.
you've got your old pile
Yeah.
sitting there just without any support or on it. It's just a pile, right?
Well, okay, so you gather up all of your materials in the very beginning, okay? You're going to have 60% woody things, fungus
Yeah.
food, like wood chips,
Yeah.
okay? So if you had 10 tubs or 10 trash cans, then 6 of them would be wood chips. And
Right.
then you would have 4 of them would be greens, like it would be a plant material, a
Right.
garden type material, or a kitchen scrap that have been dried out so they're not rotting. You don't want them rotting yet. You put them somewhere there where they can dehydrate, and so that you get enough material so that when you get it wet, it's wet on today when I start my pile. Because if it stays wet while you're keeping it, it starts to decompose and you start collecting organisms. You don't want to collect an organism until you start your entire pile. Okay. And then your last one, because we only have 9 so far. So your last container is a high nitrogen. And so that would be the easiest thing to get is like alfalfa from a farmer who raises alfalfa, or grow your own. That's the easiest high nitrogen. There are other things like seeds, there's other things, but alfalfa is the easiest one to get a hold of.
Yeah.
So on the day you're going to make your pile, you get everything super wet. So if it's in trash cans, I just have a bunch of big tubs. If you go onto the Patreon, I know you're subscribed, just
Right.
You can watch my composting videos, and I show this process. And so you would look at that, and it will show me, I just fill up the tubs with water, and then they soak overnight. So they soak for 12 to 24 hours. And then I dump the excess water off, and then I mix all of this stuff. And that's where the wire ring comes in, the fence. So I have a wire ring that's empty, and I set it up on a pallet so the air can come under the bottom. So it's empty on there, and then I will put I'll mix up the greens, browns, and high nitrogens all in there until that wire thing is filled up.
Yeah, okay.
And then you need a compost thermometer to stick in the middle of it, and you watch that thermometer every day. And as soon as you hit 131 degrees, then you wait for 3 days, and then you turn it. And when you turn it, you're going to undo the wire thing, and you're going to move it over. So your wire thing is here. It's been hot for 3 days over 131. And then you move it over to a new pallet. So you undo it, bring it over here, put it back together on a new pallet. It's empty. And then you turn with a pitchfork this old pile, and you'll tear the top and sides off. You get the hot metal out, and you put it in the bottom of that new ring. And then you take your sides and top, you put them in the middle of the new ring. You take your old bottom, put it on top. And then you put your thermometer back in it. And in 24 hours, it should be up above 130 again. And so, but all those directions are on that video.
Okay, all right.
And so if it gets to 130, then, well, it's actually 131 Fahrenheit, then you would wait 3 days, but it might get up to 150 real quick. And so as soon as it hits 150, you're only waiting 2 days, so 48 hours. But what if it pops up above 160? Then you only wait 24 hours, and then you turn it again. And you'll usually do this turning process about 5 to 7 times. And that it takes about 3 weeks. And once your 3 weeks is over, and you'll know it's over because it's not 3 weeks. It's a time period of this heating up and cooling off. Because it cools off when you turn it, and then it'll heat up again. So once it doesn't get over 131 again, that means it's done. And you've turned it 4, 5, 6 times or whatever. Okay. And so once it doesn't get above 131 again, that is when you will add your earthworms. Okay. But it has to be below 80 degrees. Then you add a handful of earthworms into that, and you spray it every day with water to keep it between 50 and 7% moisture. And when you do that, then the worms will eat it for about 3 to 4 months. And then that compost is maturing. And then that's when you want to go ahead and use it.
Great.
I like to let mine mature for about a year.
Yeah, well, good.
But that's the complicated process, but that's the fastest way to make compost.
Okay,
And you can do it within a couple months then.
Yeah, 2 to 3 months. It just depends on how quick you want it to age.
Yeah.
But the aging process is the most important. The longer you age it, the more microbes you will catch, because you're trapping microbes from the atmosphere. And so because the spores move through the atmosphere.
So how long is that aging process then, usually, William?
Anywhere from 3 months to 14 months.
Oh, so we're talking a year then.
About, yeah. I mean, if you need a plant nutrient, like we're talking about fertilizer tonight. So if you're looking for nitrogen and a plant nutrient, because you've got to get nutrients on your plants, you could use it after 2 months.
okay. All right.
But if you're trying to build soil long term, you want that to sit there and catch as many microbes, spores, and cysts as possible. And those move on the air, those move in the rain.
And they'll be on your garden or your land or wherever anyway.
Yeah.
It's not disappearing. Okay, John threw some weeds into the the compost pile tonight that didn't have seeds on them. They were just dark green leaves. I wonder what they're beneficial or not. I don't know. But so that sort of thing is okay to put in your compost pile. what about adding the roots? Just
Yeah, roots is fine. Anything that, any part of a plant is fine. Leaves, roots, stems, flowers, fruits, seeds, it's all fine.
Okay,
Okay, seeds are all right then,
well,
because they get above
Yeah.
130 degrees and,
well, we don't
Yes,
have weeds.
yeah. That's why you want it to get above 131, is it's gonna kill the seeds.
Oh,
So you don't spread weeds. That's the purpose of making a hot thermophilic compost, is to
Yeah.
kill
Okay.
weed seeds and to kill pathogens. Pathogens don't live over high temperatures.
okay,
Okay, but if we don't have a thermometer,
Buy one if you want to make compost.
we shouldn't be.
Just
Okay.
invest in
we
one.
buy one.
Well,
All
we
right,
do
we'll
need to
buy
get
one.
They're-
Okay,
They're
Okay.
$80 on Amazon. It's called a
Okay.
composting thermometer, and they're 3 feet long, so that they'll fit in the middle of this big pile.
Okay,
so I have another question on a different topic altogether.
It's 9 o'clock.
We have our, I thought we were overwatering. And so I turned down the level of water and a couple of the trees that I had that died up, that were in pots, dried up, and the leaves now are,
they're green leaves that are dry.
that are crinkly.
Yeah,
Uh-huh.
And, but it looks like the stem is still all right. I don't know, have I destroyed the trees or?
Okay, what you want to do, get up from this video right now, run out there to that tree and put it in a pan of water so it will start soaking water from the bottom. So you
Okay.
get it completely saturated.
All
And
right,
then put the hose on it and water it a lot. There's a chance it's not dead.
yeah,
How long has it been since it's been that way?
well, we noticed it
notice
yesterday.
it tonight.
Well, we,
Go, yeah, get out there and water it right now and you might be able to save it.
Okay,
yeah,
I don't know if we've got a pot or something to, oh yeah, we do. We've got a big pot.
If you don't have something to set it in, get a trash bag. Just a big black trash bag and put underneath it.
Okay,
all right,
Pull the trash bag up around the pot and
all right,
fill that up with lots of water.
okay,
Because just if when the water in a pot gets that dry, if you just water it from the top, most of the
Yeah.
water will just go down the sides and out the holes.
yeah,
And you're
Okay.
not going to saturate the interior of that root ball to save the tree. So yeah, get it in a bigger bucket so it'll hold water, or put it in a heavy trash bag. So it'll
then the
hold
leaves will
water.
fall and grow new leaves or at this
If
time? of
there's a
year?
chance it might sprout new leaves, yeah.
okay,
If it doesn't sprout new leaves, it's dead. It's too far gone. But you might be able to save that tree, but don't wait until tomorrow.
All
okay,
right,
we'll do it tonight while it's cooler too.
okay,
Okay, and then, did you have another question, John?
no, I think.
Okay, you were talking about extract of alfalfa,
Yeah,
make that in your blender.
yeah.
You might have 3 cups of it when you're done. What's the ratio that you add that brew to the water that you're feeding your plants?
I just kind of put it on straight.
You
So
put it on-
if I have a big handful of alfalfa, like whatever I can stuff into a big powerful Vitamix, and then I'll
Yeah.
just fill up the Vitamix with water. Put your alfalfa in first, then put the water in, and then I just strain that and I use it straight.
Sure.
And
And
I
then-
just spray it. I put it in a sprayer
It,
and then I
okay,
spray it. So I mist the leaves. So it'll cover a whole garden.
that 3 cups will cover a whole garden?
Well, no, I mean, it's probably more like 6 or 8 cups, but yeah. I mean,
Hey,
depending on how big your garden is, because you're just misting the plants. You're not pouring the water on, you're misting it with like a pump up sprayer.
Sure. Okay, now you mentioned commercial fertilizers. I bought AgriGrow. I don't know if you've heard of it.
Yeah,
have.
sure. Yeah.
Okay, would that be something, we're just adding things, starting out and moving things along. I guess that is a good thing to be putting into the garden, the AgriGrow. What do you think? We have
Well,
fish fertilizer.
AgriGrow, I'm thinking AgriGrow is like a brand name, so They probably have lots of different products, I think.
Because it's a liquid fertilizer that it's brown. It's got a lot of stuff in it, and it's just a 334 or something like that. You know, it's not
Yeah,
very
sure. Yeah.
like
Yeah.
the fish fertilizer. It's not very much.
Okay,
Yeah.
But it
I
has
mean-
a lot of minerals in it already.
I
And
mean, I don't know. It's hard to know what's in all those.
all right.
The main thing, anytime you're using a commercial fertilizer to get over to, convert over to where your soil is functioning and you don't need it, you want to be using as little as possible. So if your plants look really good, don't use any.
They don't look good. That was another question. My bean leaves are not tall.
Are they
bean
yellow?
are Tall,
yes, they're yellow.
and they're yellow.
Yeah, get your Agri Girl on there. Just follow
Okay.
the directions on your bottle, get them on there.
And so how frequently
Yeah,
should I?
Follow the
fertilize?
directions on your bottle.
every week.
Probably a teaspoon in a gallon of water once a week.
All right,
Well,
What it's
actually,
gonna
it's
say.
2 ounces in a gallon, 4 ounces in a gallon of water for established.
well,
And I did 2. And I figured rather than fertilizing it 1 to 2 weeks, I'll fertilize it that much every week.
and and then at the same time use fish fertilizer, probably not.
Or do we use both?
Probably use them at the same, I mean, you use one or the other.
Okay,
They're pretty much the same thing. I mean, they're the different things, obviously, but what I mean by they're the same thing is you're giving your plant a nutrient that they're not getting from the soil.
Right.
Exactly, okay.
So yeah,
I-
if you're trying to feed the microbes, make sure that you're getting the microbe food in there, which we've already talked about,
okay.
The microbes into the soil, you mean?
The food, the.
Yeah,
fertilizer.
microbe food is the ingredients for compost. You don't have to make compost. You can just put that microbe food right around your plants.
Okay, and so rather than spraying the leaves with that stuff, we're gonna put it into the soil, and I didn't know how much, I did maybe a half a cup per plant. Quarter of a cup per plant,
Yeah,
would you say
sure,
that's
yeah,
about right?
yeah.
Okay. All
I
right.
mean, yeah,
Um,
I don't know.
yeah, can you, and then another question I had was, making, compost tea. Can you
Okay.
make compost tea from those nice green fat leaves that we've got in our yard? John was composting them tonight, but I was thinking when you were talking about compost tea, I thought, oh, maybe we could have just composted those. in a tea.
Okay, here's the deal. If you grind those up and make a tea out of a living plant, it's not a compost tea. That would be a plant tea, like an alfalfa tea. The reason you're using an alfalfa tea is because it has tricantanol in it.
Right,
And so that's going to stimulate growth. If you're using any other plant, then you're going to be feeding your plants whatever those plants have in them.
okay,
The reason you use a compost is because the compost has collected all of the beneficial aerobic microbes that you need on your plants and in your soil to feed the plants.
okay,
So there's different purposes for the different things that you would make.
and you did talk about compost tea several classes back. and how
Yeah.
to do- Okay, but, would you make,
Want to come sit here now?
yeah, I could, would you make a tea out of, the extract of green plants or just alfalfa?
Just alfalfa is the only one, because who knows what's in the other plants?
Okay,
The only
And-
beneficial thing I know of that I'm aware of making an extract out of or a tea from a living plant is alfalfa.
okay,
Anything else would just be a really good high quality compost that's had worms eating it for a year. That's the
Alright.
best thing you can do.
okay. And, tell us again how much your worms are. I know that the red wigglers, I was reading about that today, and everybody says that red wigglers they can be invasive. You don't want to use them. Is that right?
That,
Or-
you know what, that's a hard one for me to swallow, that they would be invasive. If they don't already live where you are, then maybe they would be invasive. Are you in Utah or Missouri?
No, we're
Back-
in Utah now.
So, yeah, they're already there, so they're not invasive.
Yeah. But we probably need some. I have a worm bin. I mean, I've never used it because I don't have the worms,
Yeah.
but.
So I charge $40 for a
Okay.
handful of worms.
Okay, let's see. What is the ratio that you would add with your, oh, you already talked about that. Your extract of alfalfa? Yeah, you just pour it on. And
Yeah,
how much
just
you pour
straight.
on each plant?
Just spray it on.
Oh, spray, right, okay. All right, next question was, when you were talking about, you said that there were 4 things that are issues. Number 2 was tilling the soil, and number 4 was monocropping. What was number 3 again?
It was less harmful chemicals that are commonly used in agriculture. Number 1 would be the most harmful chemicals.
Okay,
So I just separated the chemicals into 2 different groups because there are a lot of chemicals that are really bad, and there's a lot of them that are not as bad.
okay.
So that's why I put them as number 1 and number 3.
Let's see. What is a healthy microbiome? We talked about that. But how do we get, well, we get a healthy microbiome. Did I say that right? With the 40-60 ratio, correct?
Yeah,
Okay,
you get your garden going, you have living plants in it, and the exudates coming out of the roots are going to feed your microbes. And on
okay,
and around the plants that are growing, you mulch it with things like wood chips, and that's going to be your detritus sphere. And when you mow your lawn, you can put that and mulch with that. Any organic matter you have, you mulch it with that. That's going to feed your bacteria and fungus. And then your protozoa, nematodes, microarthropods, infiltrates, earthworms, all those things are going to be eating the bacteria and fungus and each other. And that creates the nitrates and the ammonias that feed your
Awesome.
plants. And it mineralizes all of the other little things like molybdenum and zinc, copper, all the trace elements.
that are so important. So, oh gosh, now I forgot what I was gonna ask you. The wood chips are around the plants, but, too much nitrogen, that's a question I had. Too much nitrogen equals what? You were talking about that right after the 4 bad things. For
So in the context of what I've talked about tonight,
yes,
too much nitrogen would have meant too much protein, which
Okay.
means you're gonna have less fungus in your soil. You would have more bacteria in your soil, which means you're gonna grow a gigantic weed patch. And it would be hard to grow the foods that we commonly eat, except for the cabbage family. Because the cabbage family really like all that stuff.
okay,
Because they're in early succession, like all the weeds.
they like bacteria.
Yeah, they like to be bacterial dominant.
Okay. And let's see, did I have another question? I think you got them all. Better to use alfalfa than the leaves from our weeds. They're an
Yeah.
interesting flat, round, like that type of leaf, and kind of a bushy sort of plant.
Yeah. So you've got 2 options for those. Either put them in a compost or just put them directly on your garden surface underneath your growing plants.
Okay,
Those are your 2 options for all of your garden waste. That's what you can do. You can even, those are your 2 options for everything, even kitchen scraps. But you know, sometimes kitchen scraps are yucky and slimy and moldy, and so you don't really want them in your garden. So it's a little more hygienic to compost them first.
Well, you don't want flies.
Right, yeah. So that's why it's better to compost them.
Okay. But if it was really dry here, which it is, and hot, we could just put them on the garden and they'll dry up, won't they?
Yeah, exactly. And it will do the same thing for your soil.
Okay,
It just takes longer.
right. Well,
But-
this was really good tonight.
Okay, great.
I've been feeling like we needed this, and I thought it was very interesting too, where you said at the beginning that NPK is a thing of the past.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's becoming that. As more people become aware of what soil health actually means, yeah, the whole idea of fertilizer is becoming a thing of the past. I'm sure you've heard all your life that you have to get the right pH in your garden soils. That's becoming a thing of the past also. Because if you just feed these microbes, they will automatically adjust the pH.
Wow.
And they don't adjust it everywhere in the garden. They adjust it in little tiny sections along the root of the plant. So you can have 10 different pH readings in 1 inch of root growth, because the microbes in those different sections of the roots are doing different things, different functions. Some of them are mineralizing potassium, others are mineralizing zinc or boron, and they need different pHs to do that. And so if you have enough of the species of bacteria that are in those areas along that root, then they will just adjust the pHs needed to do what needs to happen. The fantastic thing that we've learned in recent years is that the plant is in control of all of that, because it will put out exudates. So it's feeding those microbes specifically the right ratios of sugars and proteins, carbohydrates, so that the certain kind of microbe will grow that will mineralize a specific element like zinc or boron. And then as that colony begins to grow, just during their natural process of growth, the pH is adjusted so that the plant can assimilate all of those things like the minerals. So we don't need to worry about pH anymore. I mean, that used to be a huge thing. We would always check for pH, and we would say, oh, the pH of this field is such and such, so we need to put out so many tons of lime per acre on our 1,000-acre farm. Well, farmers are still doing that, but we don't need to do that anymore.
Well, if you're growing things like azaleas, and here we have too much alkalinity in our soil from the salt,
Yeah, right.
azaleas need a lower pH.
Right, exactly. And so what are you going to do with your azaleas? From what I just taught you, what are you going to do now? Now you're the student.
I'm going to use fish fertilizer and composting and feeding the plant and hope that it does its own thing.
Okay, if you want that azalea to do its thing right now, this year, you're going to need to adjust your pH. But over the long run, in the next 5 years and going on into decades, you are going to get a great compost going, and you're going to let it go for 1.5 years, and you're going to collect as many species of fungus and bacteria as you possibly can, and you're going to put that compost out there all around your yard, 1 inch thick. You wouldn't need nearly 1 inch, but if in a small yard you could. You put it out there, let's just say 1/4 inch thick, and all of those cysts and spores of the microbes in that compost, they are going to begin to grow. And if you have an azalea growing there, that azalea knows what it needs, and it is going to select from the massive amount of microbes that you have collected. They are there now, so it will select the ones that it needs, and they will form a symbiotic relationship, and now the pHs will be adjusted automatically along those root hairs, so that you don't have to worry about pH anymore. You'll have the most beautiful azaleas in the world, and you'll win all the gardening contests because your soil is functioning. but you'll have to do some hard work in the beginning to get a really good compost to start this soil health journey, to start this process. And all it means is that your mineral cycle is working. That's all it means. You will get your mineral cycle working the way it was designed by a grand creator in the first place.
Fantastic. I do have Hollytone. It's by Epsoma. It's a organic, natural, supposedly natural. You know how you feel about natural, but organic. But that's what I have, and that's what I've been putting on them.
Good.
So next year we'll be adding something else here.
Good. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
Now, I thought of something. We have these weeds that they look like a grass. They have a little bit of red at the bottom of them. And I was thinking as you were talking, I've been pulling them and they have this beautiful root system on them. Really pretty growing, but they're growing right next to a plant. So we don't want it robbing the nutrients of the soil for that plant. But I'm wondering, should we just cut them off or should I pull them out?
You know, how's your plant doing that's growing next to it? Is it suffering?
Some
Or is it
are,
thriving?
yes, some are not. So just look at the plant
You
before I
kind
decide.
of just have to see. If it looks like a plant is suffering, pull the weeds maybe around it and then give it fertilizer.
Okay.
You know,
We
if
have some that
you,
are 3 feet tall now in the front. They just sprung up while we were gone, and
yeah,
and
yeah,
in some cases I can't tell what's that and what is a daylily, for instance.
yeah.
So
Well, that's a good thing to do. You know, if your garden's big enough, you could do some side-by-side trials. Try pulling some of the weeds near the plants and leave some of the others and see what happens, you know, because sometimes plants do very much better. That was a weird way to say it, but sometimes plants honestly do so much better if they are growing with other species.
oh right.
So, you
Well,
know,
it is
weeds are
grass.
not necessarily a bad thing.
Yeah.
I mean, I had some pests getting into my cabbages this year because I pulled all the other weeds out. The only reason I pulled them is because they were going to seed, and I don't want tons of weed seeds in there to deal with.
Right.
But once I took out all those other weeds, then the pests started. I started getting more pest pressure. I mean,
Wow.
it wasn't seriously bad, but I saw more of them there. I didn't actually lose any plants, so it
Well,
wasn't
we
super
actually-
bad. But
This is in our front yard, the front landscape.
uh-huh.
And so some of the weeds are so tall that you can't really see what is really growing there.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
I will just check that then to see what's the health of the plant that I want growing and leave the roots if I
You know,
think the plant is doing okay, or otherwise I'll pull it out.
right.
All right. Yeah, I pulled one out last night and I realized after I pulled it that it was my daylily. The leaves were very similar to the daylily.
Yeah.
Helena's on. I wonder if she has a question.
Helena, how are you tonight? We've been talking for a while. If you have any questions, you can unmute yourself and ask, or you could just type in the chat if you have any questions. But I was actually about getting ready to wrap up here. But if you would like to ask anything, you certainly can. I will let me move this out of the way here.
Well, I had just tried to get on at the beginning,
Oh,
and
yeah.
then I was like, "Oh, I'm just gonna try one more time," and you were on. And I was like, "Sweet! Now
Oh,
I know
that's
there's
good.
one to listen to."
Good. Yeah, great. Perfect. Yeah, I was a few minutes late, and so I apologize for that.
No, it's totally fine.
But I do have it recorded tonight, so I'll get that on YouTube.
Okay, I'm excited. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
William, will you be talking next week then about what you learned last week?
No, I did that last week.
Oh, you did the class.
So it's on YouTube. Go to my YouTube channel, and I do have an update of my the class I took with Nicole Masters.
Okay.
It
I
was
will-
brilliant though. It was good. We went and saw these beaver ponds and stuff. This whole watershed has been restored because ranchers stopped killing beavers, and they have enough irrigation water now that they're irrigating more land. The sagebrush is dying. It's turning into a grassland, which is the way it's supposed to be. All of this stuff that I'm preaching was proved by going and seeing that. Not that we needed to prove anything. It's just beautiful to see it. so I don't feel like such a crazy man all the time. I mean, I know I'm not a crazy man because I know it's true. And there's hundreds of places where you can go and you can see that the ecological processes are working really well. So it was fun to go up there. And it's 2.5 hours from my house here, but it's only like, I don't know, maybe 50 miles north, but it's all on wild dirt hunting roads because it's just this ranch. It's probably one of the most remote places as far as getting to. Some of the people who came, they just flew the private airplanes in, which is a good idea, you know. But no, it was great. You know, it was good. I learned quite a bit from her. And the main thing I learned is I'm doing the right stuff. Just keep going. So that was great. Because she's been preaching this stuff for over 20 years. So it was super fun too. And I've only been preaching it for, I don't know, who knows. I've been teaching gardening classes for 20 years, but soil health maybe the last 5-8 years. Because I didn't really get it before. The fun thing that I've really loved though is that I grew up doing it this way. We just didn't know that we were cool until now. You know, my grandpa, he never, I mean, he still had a team of horses until he died. He never used the fossil fuel thing. Not that that's bad. He just didn't. He was never using the pesticides and the herbicides. We always made fertilizer out of compost. We always were feeding the microbes, but we didn't know what a microbe was. That's a very recent thing for me to know what a microbe is. And so, I mean, I've read about them all my life, but you know, it's just been, I mean, there's been huge breakthroughs just in the last 5 years in just all of science. So that's my thing. In the wintertime, I'm on webinars a lot, usually 2 to 5 hours a day, a lot. And then in the summertime, I'm not on any because I'm out there actually putting it all into practice. So yeah, Nicole Masters was brilliant. Just jump on and watch my presentation from last week. It's up there on YouTube. It's on my YouTube channel. So I just go through the highlights. It was probably a boring presentation, but I just showed the highlights of what I learned from her. So it was super fun.
Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. I'm going to go ahead and shut this down, and this recording will be on YouTube in a day or so. So good night and have fun gardening.
Great class.
Thank
That's what
you.
I need. Thank you.